Hello, my name is Professor Banh, and my secret identity is Anthro Woman. I scourge the world and try to fight against sexism, racism, and classism using social science and specifically anthro theory. Just kidding, I just like to travel. If those things are coming out, great. My secret residence is the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, and my sidekick is named Flint Mead. Today, my talk will be on different identity theory formations with a dab of race anthro theory. Now, if I were to ask you, what are you? How would you answer? So let's think about that. What are you? Now, how you answer says a lot about you. It says who you want to associate with, pray with, exclude, go to war against, marry, vote for, and even where you live, eat, and act. Some theorists argue that your identity defines everything about you. But before I start my talk, I want to give you an important caveat. That means warning. As an anthropologist, I'd like to say that we're all descended from Africa. This is called the Out of Africa theory and taught in all universities, except for University of Michigan, but that's for another talk. Yes, all Homo sapiens are from Africa. See the AAA statement on race on May 17th, 1998, online for more of that. So basically what I'm trying to say in all this fluting theory is, in a nutshell, we are not separate and clean races. People do not come in clean, demarcated boxes. Yes, I'm looking at you. There is no such thing as different biological races. People sure do get discriminated against based on the constructions of race, though. See social construction theories. But again, race is a social construction. It's basically, and this is the big secret that all anthropologists know about, is that race is actually invented to justify a specific act, which is slavery. And there's plenty of books to talk about that. Instead, if you look at the vast genetic evidence, and again, we've already almost completely mapped the genome now, and to quote the AAA statement, most physical variation, about 94%, lies within so-called races. Yeah, so basically our ancestors, quote, got around, if you know what I mean. They did the wild with pretty much everyone, including Neanderthals. And again, for European descended people out there, that's for another talk for you. All I have to say here is that race is a social construction. And again, it was used to justify inequality, specifically taking people from a certain continent, Africa, into the U.S. Now, Jared Diamond argued in his famous book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, The Fate of Human Societies, 2005, that certain people who conquered continents were viewed as, quote, superior to other people that they conquered. Now, let's think about that for a while. If I were to ask you to put in a hierarchical line who's the top race and who's the bottom, what comes to mind? Well, a lot of people equate that kind of hierarchy with superior and inferior. But Jared Diamond disagrees with that in his very famous book. He argues that geography is actually what made hierarchy. He says, in reality, in 11,000 BC, we, Homo sapiens, were all the same hunters and gatherers. Yeah, so what happened? What changed? Well, Diamond argues that Eurasia and parts of Africa and some of the Americas had a better geography where you could actually domesticate and grow plants, which led to agriculture, which gave people pretty much a head start. So basically, these people in Europe and parts of Asia, they pretty much won the lottery in geography. And they were able to conquer people who did not have the same arable land or horses that they could domesticate. Again, so it wasn't superiority, it was actually just winning the lottery in geography. Also, these lucky people, winners of the lottery, actually who had domesticated animals, basically became resistant to their diseases. And when they conquered other peoples, their diseases that they brought with them, that they themselves were immune to, were used to kill the vast people they conquered in epidemic proportions. That would probably be another talk about Native Americans. Again, if you add in germs and add in, really more importantly, guns, You can see how these people who had a head start really took advantage of it. And again, Diamond won a Pulitzer Prize for this book. It's actually taught in every university in the globe now, translated to every language. So he had a pretty great idea, and he backed it up with a lot of theory. But he was just one dude with his geography theory and how people are affected. There are other theories too. Now, if you go into our own trusty American Heritage Dictionary, which I did, and you look up the definition of identity, it says, and I quote, "The condition of belonging to a certain person or thing, the set of characteristics by which a person or thing is definitely recognizable or known, the awareness that an individual or group has of being distinct, persisting identity. And lastly, the fact or condition of being the same as something else." I actually can go on and on. There's plenty of definitions of identity in the American Heritage, but I'll stop. Well, most academics will give precedence to identity linked to race and ethnicity. And again, one of the most famous people is Karen Brocken, anthropologist, in her book called How Jews Became White Folks and What That Says About Race in America. Pretty much it describes how Jewish Americans, or Jews that immigrants who immigrated to the United States, in particular how they became ethnic Anglos and white through a certain means. This really goes against our notions, particularly American notions, of race and ethnicity that are fixed, right? So how did Jews come over here as non-white and then become white? Well, in her book, How Jews Became White Folks, she pretty much nailed it down to Hitler. Hitler tried to kill what? The Jews. He definitely didn't think they were white. And our reaction in the United States was horror to this genocide. And so slowly but surely, we changed our designation of other white groups, not just Jews, but of Italians, of Irish, including Jews, as white. So that's probably going to give a mind meld to a lot of students right now who are listening. What? Irish and Italian were not white? That is right. They were not white when they first came to the United States. Eastern Europeans were also not white, and the process for them to, quote, become white actually was a specific social and political construction. Again, back to our social construction theories. Now again, if you are, let's say, African or Black, at different times in America, if you're fixated on this clean box of race, you're called African, you're called Black, you're called Negro, you're called Native American if your mom is Native American, you're white if in Brazil if you're rich, so if you're African descent and you're darker than, let's say, Wesley Snipes, and you're wealthy, and if you're Caucasian looking but you're poor, you are considered white in Brazil. And in South Africa, Chinese have successfully petitioned to be named legally Black. So again, what is your conception of Black globally and also in the United States when it's always been changing? That's right. Chinese are officially deemed Black in South Africa. Pretty cool, right? Interesting. So now we've explained how we're all the same and how race was a social construction to basically justify slavery. We've also learned that people became more powerful basically because they won the lottery in geography. And yeah, their guns helped to take over other people. But again, humans, we're an interesting lot. It's all about how we feel. So we've gone through a lot of major big theories, fairly famous theories about identity. But, I want to go over the 4 warring camps. We're going to go over one camp here. It's called the Postmodern Camp. And Louis Althusser, in his really famous Ideology and Ideological State Apparatuses Towards an Investigation, written in the 1970s, is part of this camp. Now, he has an interesting concept on identity and ideology. And he says that our identity has everything to do with how people perceive us. That affects our identity. So for instance, let's say if I were to say, well, I identify as an umbrella. Well, if everyone sees you as, let's say, a Mexican-American man, well, that's going to affect your identity because they're always going to say, address you that way. His work draws upon Marx, Gramsci, Freud, Lacan, and pretty much they argue that, quote, agents of repression are inevitable. Ideology hails and interpolates concrete individuals as concrete subjects. Wow. Is that making everyone kind of cringe? We can have our own identity, they argue, but our identity is really affected by how people interpolate us, which means how people see us. Uh-oh. Yes, so you can see how some people are really against this ideology and this camp. Thus, this affects our identity. We are oppressed, he argues, by how people perceive us. For example, you think of race, United States. That has very much been an agent of how people perceive other people. Another French dude, his name is Pierre Bourdieu. Now, he came out with a kind of a complementary theory, and his theory is actually based on Aristotle and Marcel Mauss, and he elaborates on the notion of habitus. So by explaining its dependency on theory and history. So basically, habitus is how you behave, how you believe, and how you act, even the minute things of how you move your body. So I would like to ask you to stop. Don't move. Don't move an inch. Don't move a finger. Don't move a leg. Look now down at your legs and your arms. Now, ladies, particularly American ladies, are you crunched together? Are your legs folded over? Have you taken up very little space? Men, don't move. Glance at the ladies. Glance at yourself. Are your legs spread apart? Is all your stuff all over? Well, that's your habitus, as Bourdieu says. We are born with scripts, cultural scripts, of how to act and how to be. My example is actually on gender, but this actually goes to Americans' sense of space culture, which is very different from Latin America, right? Very different from Asia. There's actually the distance of how people should stand from each other. It's actually different according to culture. And Pierre Bourdieu talks about habitus, how we're born with this innate, not born, but we're taught how to be by habitus, and we internalize it. We don't think about it. It's an everyday process. We generally think about it when we leave the country, when we see how we're kind of the odd man out. But that is habitus. Now, there's another camp, the second camp. They're called the transnational folks. They're identity transnational folks. Paul Gilroy argues that we actually should not look upon the mere nation state, but instead look at transnational and beyond national borders as your identity. This is crazy, right? You see how this goes against the postmodern school. He uses black identity as an example, and he says black identity or African pan-diasporic identity is a fluid identity. It's a dialectic conversation with spatial roots and courses. So I want you guys to think of Michael Jackson. Is Michael Jackson African, African American, or African diasporic? So you see how the postmoderns people would argue that he has lots of characteristics of African American identity. But Gilroy, the opposing camp, would say no. His effect, his way of being, his identity is pan-ethnicity. It crosses all over the world because African diaspora is all over the world. Again, intriguing identity that's not linked to any border but linked to the globe. Now, identity of race folks, Omni and Wynette, they talk about this thing of racial formation. They're actually at this point world famous, pretty much the big league people on identity, and they talk about how race identity is basically a social construction formed by political, economic means and has usually a tool. And again, this is another school that goes, I wouldn't say goes against Paul Gilroy, but has a kind of a political formation. So if you look at, let's say, the census. The census is a very interesting idea. It has changed throughout time. If you look at how people are viewed, Filipinos at one time were viewed as white. If you're one drop black and you're blonde and blue-eyed, you're still viewed as black. Okay, so it's very interesting. Our most recent census in 2000 that let people actually check off two boxes, two races, quote unquote, had really surprising results. Most people thought that maybe the multiracial folks, if you're half Asian, half white, half black, half Mexican, blah blah, you would actually put you would put check off two, but that was not the case. What the surprising results was, it was actually people of Anglo descent, actually Euro-Anglos, who actually put in two racial groups, and they put, you can guess, they actually put Native American and Anglo as a racial group. And that probably, Omni and Wynette would probably argue that had something to do with, if you're of Native American descent, sometimes you can get college applications, and it's something that maybe you view as important to you. And some people want to have, the casino, and you have to prove you're a tribe. And so again, it's social and economically constructed with a huge political component. Well, I'm going to stop right now. And my next talk will be on other theories of identity: spatial identity, language identity, and gender identity. See you later.